ahead. You see the ES here where we put in a low in June, right up to the high in September when the Fed announced QE3. We moved back off of that to the 50% level, just shy of the 618. We rallied up, we met some resistance, and we're now back up to the highs. Okay, we were just shy of the 382, and with the trading that we saw on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, we're right back up here at the highs. So let's take a look at the fibs from this point, this low here in November, up to this recent high. We pointed this out, that if we do manage to trade higher, that the likelihood is that we could see the 127 extension at 1476.59. What I think is more likely, we see this high right here remain resistance and we move off of this. Conceivably, we could see a move with these two pivots back to the 1431, which is right around the point and figure support and resistance level of 1432. Okay, so we have to keep an eye out on that number as a target, a pullback to that area, and conceivably we could see a pullback to the 50% level and fill this gap. Okay, taking a look at the weekly, the one thing that I want to point out here is that on the S&P and the spiders, we had an bullish engulfing candle here on the weekly. This is still a very strong candle and strong bullish performance from the bullish camp. Okay, we have this trend that we've been in. That we have yet to break, so we have to keep an eye on that as well. Note that TSI has given us a sell signal, and we're trading above all of our moving averages. Looking at the counterpart to the ES and the S&P 500, obviously, is the US dollar. We've seen the high that we put in the summertime, and we've since cruised lower and created this right shoulder that I was pointing out during the summertime. We have this trend line to deal with. Okay, and if we put some fibs on here, you can see where we are in the bigger picture, right at the 50% level, and coincident with the point and figure level as well. You can also see this little mini head and shoulders, head and shoulder here, where we could see the neckline right in here. On this pullback, we can see this retracement came up to the 50% level, came back down, bounced up to the 382, and we saw this little pullback in this candle on Friday, last week. This is the weekly chart. Let's take a look at the daily. Okay, you can clearly see the head and shoulders that we put in, the head in the middle of the summer, left shoulder and right shoulder. We came up to that 382 level and rebounded off of that. Okay, so that's the DX. Taking a look at copper, as one would expect with the performance in the dollar, we've seen some resolution. We took out this high here and we moved off of that during the week. See our fibs here, that high. We try to take out that high. I'm looking at the 127 extension and possibly the 1618, which is up here at these recent highs at, or previous highs at 385. Okay. Note TSI is in a bullish TSI is in a bullish mode, so that looks good too. Crude, we saw some strength in. And we're right at that trend line. Okay. So this triangle is going to have some resolution at some point. TSI looks like it could turn and move lower, in which case I would look at this lower trend line as a possible target. My fibs, let's see, we came up to the 50% level. We tagged that upper trend line, created this pivot, and it's very likely that we could see a move back down to this lower trend line. That's if the dollar decides to move higher. Okay. If the dollar decides to move lower, we could see this conceivably move higher as well. Looking at the euro futures, we created a pivot here in the month of December, and we moved off of that down through our MAs. We did test this trend line though, so we have to keep an eye on that. TSI gave us a sell signal last week. These last pivots came down almost to the 786, that trend line, and closed right at the 618 on these particular fibs. Taking these two pivots, we came right down to the 50%, which is coincident with the lower trend line, and we saw a little bounce. All right, so keep an eye on the futures, keep an eye on the euro futures, the dollar futures, and the ES as well as copper. And taking a look at sector performance last week, we were talking about the IYR and IYT. These did quite well during the week. XLB was pointed out in the room, that was doing well, as well as XLE. I had a number of positions in XLE, still have half a position in EOG. The financials did well, XLI did well, as well as you can see XLY, XLV, XLU, and XLP. Most of the sectors did well, as you would expect with that huge up week on the S&P. Sector performance, we can see relative to the S&P, how we did with financials, energy, materials, and industrials, and what technology did last week. Last 2 days anyway. If we go out to a week, we can see the relative performance. So when you're picking your stocks during the week, keep an eye on the sectors that are doing well. And if you're looking to short, look at the ones that are doing not so well. Looking at the Spider daily and the Kumo chart, you can see that we've been meandering around the Kumo and we're back above it again. A lot of choppiness, but we are at higher highs over this last 2 months. Okay, and we can see Tenkan and Kijun are both turned back up higher. As with the ES off of these pivots here, if we could see a move, continue move this week, we see this 127 extension up here as well as recent highs that we put in September. That could be a conceivable target. Having a little reluctance on this moving much higher in the short term just because of the talk about the debt ceiling that's still out there now, which is going to be the next caveat for us to have to deal with. Stochastics is showing quite a bit of momentum, as you would expect. If we look at the weekly, we can see that bullish engulfing candle that we put in. Okay, I mean we took out all of these previous weeks of this engulfing candle. So that was pretty strong performance. I'm very interested to see what happens this week. So consequently, with half positions left, I'll probably be taking some more profits and let some of these run a little bit more. EOG was one of those positions that GTO had mentioned before Christmas, and I did quite well on. I'm still in half a position. I'm plus, well, I was plus $6 before we pulled back a little bit on Friday on the last half. I'm very curious about this pattern, this ascending higher lows, and this high that we took out on Friday, to see what happens. Now, I was pointing out on the weekly in the chat room that we have this high up here at 144, 140, whatever the hell it is up there, 146. These highs back up at 146. Now that we're above this level here, it's looking pretty good. Let's take a look at the fibs. When we took out these highs here, we have the 127 extension to look to as a target, purely if you're just looking at fibs. But if you put some confluence on here and draw some more fibs from this previous pivot up to this high, you can see the 127 extension on both of these. And stochastics is turning back up higher. So keep an eye on this week. All right. Also took a position in CHK, which on the weekly we have resistance up here at 1833. All right, and the same area, a little bit lower for the Kumo at 18. So I took this on Friday, and this is why. When we moved higher at the open, I was watching for this to continue after the 10 a.m. opening range was put in, and we flagged somewhat here. Okay, but we continue to move higher. So I bought right around 1705 on this candle here. I pointed that out on Twitter, if you remember, because we were continuing to move higher after that opening range was put in. And I felt that the momentum, because of Tinkin and Kijin, the way this Tinkin was moving higher, that we were going to continue to see upside. And that's what we did. We did close higher. I did get it around 1705, so we're only up 40 cents. But I'm looking for some continuation going into the week with CHK, at least to take out this high, which we closed right at. Stochastics is saying that we could have some more momentum, and we could see a target up here taken out, and maybe trade into Kumo a little bit. With respect to the Keltner B-bands, we could see this open up and explode to the upside, which would be quite nice because we've consolidated sideways and based here. We have some positive momentum. I like when prices close above the midpoint of the Bollinger Bands, the 20 period, which is where this is right now. So the likelihood is this is going to move higher. Not saying it, guaranteeing it will, but that's what I'm looking for. Nvidia is a position I took on Friday. I didn't mention this until the end of the day, but we did have a Kumo breakout on Wednesday, and we saw a continuation. We have Tinkin and Kijin both headed higher. We have some comments by Options Hawk regarding CES this week. I believe on the 8th they present, and taking out these highs here, these fibs, looking at this 127 extension here as well, which we're right at. And if we continue to move higher into CES, that 1618 would be my target, right at 1382-ish, I believe. Yeah, 1382. Stochastics still has some room to the upside. And the reason why I took this trade I will show you on the 5-minute. Same reason I did on CHK. If you go to the 5-minute, we can see that we had this nice opening range. We traded a little bit lower, came down to the Kumo. We continued higher after 10 a.m. What I like to do is, if a stock is trading higher from the opening range, I like to take it long. Okay, we flagged here and we moved higher. So this turned out to be a good move as well on Nvidia. I also trade gaps this way. If a stock gaps up in the morning and after 10 o'clock, if the stock continues to move higher or flags above the high at that gap, I'll take a long. Conversely, if it gaps lower and after 10 o'clock it continues to move lower, I would take a short. Noble Corp is another position I'm in for a couple of weeks now. The swing starting to play out now. We broke out above and we had a Kumo breakout on Friday. Stochastics looks good as well. I wouldn't chase this here because I am in from back in this area here. I mentioned it on Twitter. You can check it out on stocktwits.com to see where I originally entered this. I don't know off the top of my head, I forget. But we had a Tenkan Kijun cross and we have a Kumo breakout. So looking at the XLE, we have these highs here that we need to deal with next, and then eventually this high up here. Looks like we could head up here with stochastics oversold and moving higher. XLB, we're extended and overbought. XLI, keep an eye on this one, a little bit extended, approaching overbought. We could move a bit higher. XLF, same thing. If you look at GS, you can see what we flagged here at these highs, and then we bolted on Wednesday when we gapped up, but we're continuing. So this is something I would keep an eye on for a fade. If we see any indication of sellers stepping up. This is a very bullish chart, so take that advice with a grain of salt. I'm just watching what happens, how much higher we can conceivably make it, this level up here of resistance, and then possibly a short with stops up above 140, 141. XME, I think I saw Stewie posting something about this. We'll look at these highs. All depends on the US dollar. One of my favorite stocks for the week is AutoNation. We're right at resistance. We saw some momentum here. Depending on what happens this week, if we move above this level, this might be a good long. However, if we start to move off of this Kumo, we could see some short action. Note where Chiku is and Tenkan Kijun cross underneath, which is a bit of a weaker signal, but I'll be keeping an eye on AutoNation. Notice it was heavily talked about last week on StockTwits. Keep an eye on Coca-Cola. It is nice Kumo breakout, and we took out this upper trend line. And a doji on Friday after Wednesday, Thursday, Friday move up and the gap. Stochastics looks like we can move a little bit higher though. So if we get above this level here, 37.98, 38, we could see this next level, 38.39. ANGI, Angie's List, could see with stochastics moving lower, we can come back down and test Kumo and then move higher. Looks like we're trying to break trend that we put in since April. An 8-9 month trend that we're breaking to the upside. So this could be a bullish trade after we move back down to Kumo and then move higher for a more intermediate long-term play. RMD, ResMed looks pretty interesting. Nice bullish action. Came down and consolidated off the Kumo, trying to break higher, and I would keep an eye out for a break above this level here. Okay, higher lows, provided we don't break down obviously, but if we break higher this would be nice above 42.86, 42.90. Under Armour's been pretty weak. If we get back up to the Kumo, it might be an area to short. Somewhat bullish, or excuse me, somewhat bearish chart. Stochastics is looking a little bit timid. Stryker Corp, which has been moving pretty much sideways for the entire year, looking like it wants to take out a level. But look at the daily. You can see this level here that we're starting to take out. Stochastics looks like it wants to move higher if you have patience. Alcoa had a Kumo breakout last week. See this trend that we're headed up to, the trend line we're headed up to, a possible area for a short, and this move back down to Kumo before possibly heading higher. Have to check earnings. I believe Alcoa is the first to report, so keep an eye on that as well. And as to end up, another way to check for your own setups, I like to go to Finviz, go to the screener, go to the short float, look for stocks that are, say, over 10%. Look for a pattern. I like ascending triangles in particular, similar to First Solar, US Steel, and such. This way you can pick up on some patterns that have high short interest and have ascending patterns, or whatever pattern you decide you want to check for possible trades. Okay, you could also look at channel up with high short interest. And you see LXA, ANR. I believe this is something that Stewie pointed out last week, so keep an eye on ANR. Actually, if you draw a trend line across here, this would be an ascending triangle as well. So let's take a look at DEC. See the short percent is 47.44%. That's incredibly high. So if we break out of this descending channel, this could be interesting. All right. So that's going to be it for me for today. This is Vinny coming to you from Day Trader Bootcamp. Remember to use your stops. Remember to take your